Hello, this is Jane Goodall, and I really wish I could be with you all for this Earthfest 2025, but at least I can share a few thoughts with you. Everything began for me when I was born 90 years ago, loving animals, all kinds of animals. And I was 1.5 years old, and I don't remember this, but my mother told me. And she found I'd taken a whole handful of wriggling earthworms to bed with me. Instead of getting angry, how dare you take these into your bed? Don't you dare do it again. She just said to me later, well, first of all, I told you they needed to be back in the garden, and we took them back. But she said, you were looking at them so intently that I thought maybe you were wondering, how do they walk without legs? And then when I was 4 years old, I was taken for a holiday on a farm, a proper farm in the country, and my job was to collect hen's eggs. And I began asking everybody, but where is the hole on the hen big enough for the eggs to come out? And nobody told me. So I remember seeing a hen going into the little hen house where they slept at night to keep them safe from foxes, and thinking, oh, she must be going to lay an egg, crawling after, big mistake, squawks of fear, she flew out. But now I'm on the path of discovery, so I went into an empty hen house and waited, apparently for 4 hours. No one knew where I was, and Mum was just about to call the police when she sees me rushing towards the house. So many mothers would have grabbed that child. How dare you go off without telling us? Don't you know how worried we've been? You dare do it again. She just sat to hear the wonderful story of how a hen lays an egg. And, you know, that's the making of a little scientist, isn't it? Asking questions, not getting the right answer, deciding to find out for yourself, making a mistake, not giving up, and learning patience. It was all there. A different mother might have crushed that early scientific curiosity, and I might not be talking to you now. So when I was growing up, television hadn't been invented, and obviously not social media. So I learned partly from being out, watching the birds and the insects and the squirrels in our garden, and climbing trees, by the way, and also from books. And Mum got me books about animals. I met Dr. Dolittle when I was 8, and then when I was 10, I'd saved up just enough pennies for my week's pocket money. It was during World War II, so we had very little money. And I found this little second-hand bookshop and got a very cheap edition of Tarzan of the Apes. No television of Tarzan, no movies. I read the book from cover to cover, fell passionately in love with this glorious Lord of the Jungle. And what does he do? He marries the wrong Jane. Well, I knew there wasn't a Tarzan, and that started my dream, though. I will go to Africa, live with wild animals, and write books about them. No thought of being a scientist back then for girls. Everybody laughed at me. How will you do that? You don't have money, which was true. Africa's far away, it's dangerous. Anyway, you're just a girl. But not my mother. She said to me, what I'll say to any of you now, if you really want to do something like this, you're going to have to work awfully hard. Also, take advantage of every opportunity. And if you don't give up, hopefully you find a way. So I did well at school, but we couldn't afford university. I did a shorthand and typing course, secretarial, which was boring, but I had to get a job. I got a job in London. I actually had fun living there. But then came opportunity, a letter from a school friend inviting me to Kenya for a holiday. Couldn't save money in London, went home to Bournemouth, by the way, and got a job in a hotel around the corner. And eventually, after about 5 months, I'd saved up enough with wages and tips to get a return fare to Africa. By boat, there were planes, but they were few and very expensive. We should have gone through the Suez Canal, but there was a war between Britain and Egypt, so the boat had to go all the way around Cape Town and up to Mombasa in Kenya. It was a wonderful voyage. The first place I set foot in African soil was Cape Town, and it was exciting. And there were two people there that Mum knew, and they took me around, and it was just all magic until I began to notice on the doors to the hotels and the restaurants and all over the place these words in Afrikaans, something like slegs blank. And I said, what do these words mean? White people only. Well, my grandfather was a congregational minister. We didn't think of people according to the color of their skin, their language, their culture, but as who they were as human beings. So I was pleased to leave South Africa. It was the height, of apartheid. And when I got to Kenya, it was better. They were moving towards independence from British colonial rule. Stayed with my friend, and then somebody said to me, Jane, if you're interested in animals, you should meet Dr. Louis Leakey, famous paleontologist, someone who searches for fossils. And I went to see him. He was curator of the Natural History Museum in Nairobi, and he took me all around. He asked me lots of questions. I'd read everything I could about East African animals, so I could answer many of his questions. And guess what? Just before I met him, his longtime secretary had left, and there I was. So that boring old secretarial course, you never know, do you? And so there I was, surrounded by people who could answer all my questions about the animals, the plants, the birds, and so on of Africa. And he let me go with him, his wife, one other young girl, Gillian, and a few Kenyans, to a place that's now very famous, if you're interested in prehistory, Olduvai Gorge on the Serengeti Plains. He used to go there for 3 months every summer. He and his wife were sure that humans had once lived there. Everybody else laughed at them. When I went, it was just before the breakthrough for him, the finding of the first skull of an Australopithecus type of early human. All the animals were there. And Gillian and I were allowed out after the hard days digging for fossils. And one evening we met a rhino very, very close. Another evening, a young, fully grown male lion stood watching us, and tails moving. I think he was curious. And he followed us for about the length of a cricket pitch, which was scary but very exciting. And I think it was that evening around the campfire that Leakey decided I was the person he'd been looking for. He says for 10 years. Would I be prepared to go and try and study chimpanzees, our closest relatives, in the wild? Oh, yes. Problems. First of all, who would give money to a young girl who hadn't even been to college? Finally, he got money for just 6 months from a wealthy American. Next problem, Tanzania, which was Tanganyika back then, was the last part of the crumbling British Empire. And the authorities said, we won't be responsible for a girl going out in the forest. In the end, they said, oh, all right, but she can't come alone. So that same amazing mother came with me. And it was wonderful because for 4 whole months out of my 6, the chimps took one look at me and disappeared in the forest. And thank goodness when I got back late in the evening, there was Mum boosting my morale, telling me I was learning more than I was giving myself credit for with my binoculars, size of the groups, the foods they were eating, the calls they were making, and so on. And so it was very sad that she left just before the breakthrough observation. One chimpanzee, a male, very handsome, whom I'd named David Greybeard, he began to lose his fear of me. And on this day, I saw him sitting on a termite mound, and he was scratching open the tunnels into the mound, picking grass stems, pushing them down, and eating off the termites, biting on with their mandibles. And sometimes he picked a leafy twig, and to make it into a tool, he had to remove the leaves. David was using and making tools. If you saw that today, it wouldn't be exciting. Lots of animals use tools. Some make them. Back then, Western science believed humans and only humans used and made tools, and we were defined as man, the tool maker. And so Leakey wrote his famous telegram to me, now we must redefine man, redefine tool, or accept chimpanzees as humans. Well, after I'd been with the chimps about 2 years, this happened. And because of it, the National Geographic Society became involved. And they said, we'll fund Jane's research when the 6 months is over. And they did. So now I could relax. And I'd always known, given time, I could get the trust of the chimpanzees. And indeed, this was true. And I came to know not only David, but his best friend Goliath, top-ranking male, as I discovered, and Mike, and William, and Mr. McGregor, and old Flo and her family, and Melissa, and Ollie. And they became almost like members of my family. And I think the thing that was most striking is how like us they are. Of course, they can't speak, but gestures and postures, kissing, embracing, holding hands, patting one another for reassurance, begging for food. Males competing for dominance, standing upright, swaggering, lips bunched in a furious scowl, maybe shaking a fist, reminding me of some human male politicians. And the long childhood, the chimp child has a lot to learn, like our children. The relationship between mother, growing child, and older members of the family, very supportive of each other. And sadly, I discovered that though I thought they were like us but nicer, they are capable of violence, brutality, even a kind of primitive war. Males patrol the boundary of what we now know as their territory, and if they see individuals from a neighboring group, they may give chase, attack, and leave that unfortunate victim to die of wounds received. But just like us also, they have a loving and compassionate and altruistic side, as when an adult male may adopt an infant whose mother has died and save that child's life. So it was when I'd been with the chimps, I can't remember how long, but I get a letter from Leakey saying, Jane, I chose you because you hadn't been to college. I didn't want someone whose mind had been influenced by the very reductionist attitude to animals of science at that time. But now I want you to get a degree. I want other scientists to take you seriously. He got me a place to do a PhD. He said there was no time for an undergraduate degree in Cambridge University. And you can imagine, I was nervous. Think how I felt when those learned professors told me that I'd done everything wrong. Chimpanzees in a study should be numbered, not named. You can't talk about them having personality, mind capable of solving problems, or emotions like happiness, sadness, fear, and so on, because those are unique to us. That was taught at that time. Whether they believed it or not, I don't know. But I'd been lucky enough to have a great teacher when I was a child, actually a series of teachers. But the main one was my dog, Rusty. And then there were the cats and the guinea pigs and the hamster and the canary and the budgerigar. And if you spent time with animals, you know perfectly well we're not the only beings on the planet with personalities, minds, and feelings. So I went on, I got my PhD, and because chimps are so close biologically, so we share 98.7% of DNA with them, science gradually came to accept this new way of regarding animals as individuals with personalities. And it opened up a whole new area of research into animal personality, animal intelligence, which is still, people today are finding that animals are way more intelligent than we used to think. Not just chimps and other apes and elephants and dolphins and whales, but pigs and rats. And some of you must have seen my octopus teacher, amazingly intelligent. And people have found intelligence in insects and snakes and frogs. So there's so much to learn. If any of you are interested in that sort of thing, there has never been a more exciting time than now. I wish I was young and could leap into that kind of research. Anyway, as I say, I got my PhD. I went back to Gombe. Best time of my life. I could spend hours out in the rainforest learning about the chimpanzees, but also learning about the ecosystem of the forest, where every little plant and animal has a role to play, and the whole is like one great tapestry, all living and working together to keep the forest alive and vibrant. And I also developed a strong spiritual connection with the natural world. As I say, the best time of my life. Why did I leave? Because in 1986, I learned that chimpanzee numbers across Africa were dropping and forests everywhere were being destroyed. And I learned this at a conference. I went to the conference as a scientist, planning to stay at Gombe forever. We still have our team there 65 years later, still learning new things about chimps. But anyway, at that conference, we had a session on conservation. And that's when I learned the situation in Africa. And I just knew I had to do something. I didn't know what to do. Got money to go to the chimpanzee study sites. When I began, it was just me. By then, there were 6 other places where scientists were studying chimps, and got to learn a lot about the problems faced by chimps, the loss of habitat, the bushmeat trade, commercial hunting of animals for food, shooting mothers to steal babies for pets or to sell overseas for entertainment like circuses, and in those days, medical research, which luckily has stopped. So at the same time, I was learning something about the plight of so many people living in and around chimpanzee habitat, and the crippling poverty, the lack of good health and education, the degradation of the land as families grew, the danger as they moved into the forest of catching diseases which we share with chimpanzees, and of course the other way around. Anyway, it came to a head when I flew over the tiny Gombe National Park, which had been part of a great equatorial forest belt stretching to the west coast. By the mid-1980s, I looked down with horror. Gombe, a tiny national park, was the same old forest, but outside the hills were bare. And that's when it hit me. These communities here are poor. They're cutting down the trees in their struggle to survive, to get money from charcoal or timber, or more land to grow food, to sell, or to feed their families. And it hit me that if we can't help them find ways of making a living without destroying their environment, we can't save chimpanzees, forests, or anything else. So, the Jane Goodall Institute, JGI, we began the first true community-led conservation program. Takari, we call it, and it's JGI's method of this type of conservation. No arrogant group of white people went into the 12 poor villages around Gombe. No, it was 7 locally picked Tanzanians. And they asked the people, what can JGI do to make your lives better? So they wanted more food, restore fertility to overused farmland without chemicals. And they wanted better health and education for their children. So we worked with local Tanzanian authorities. And as they came to trust us, we could introduce water management programs. We tried to get as many scholarships as we could to give girls a chance of secondary education. Back then, no chance. This was 1994. And we provided family planning information. One thing which was really, really successful, microfinance. So a poor villager, it's usually women, they could choose a environmentally sustainable small business and take out a tiny loan, something like chickens and selling the eggs or a tree nursery. And when they paid back, they were proud because we did it. And then they can get a larger loan if they so wish and enlarge the business. So the entire program was so successful that it's now in 104 villages throughout Chimp Range in Tanzania, and it's in 6 other African countries where JGI studies and conserves chimpanzees and their habitats. Well, by this time, I'm traveling around the world, giving lectures, raising awareness, trying to raise funds for our growing programs. And even back then, mid-1980s, I'm meeting young people who seem to have lost hope. Some were angry. Some were very depressed. Some seemed just apathetic, not caring. And when I asked them, why do you feel this way? They said, well, you've harmed our future, and there's nothing we can do about it. So, of course we've harmed your future, any of you young people listening. We've been stealing your future ever since the Industrial Revolution. And something has to change. It's not possible to have unlimited economic development, unlimited, on a planet with finite natural resources and a growing human population. We need a new way of thinking, and that probably will come from the youth. So when I was meeting these young people back then, and they said there was nothing they could do, I thought, no, that's not true. And so began the Roots and Shoots program, which some of you, I think, know about. And the Jane Goodall Institute UK has a stand. So I hope you'll go and learn about Roots and Shoots. It's a humanitarian and environmental program for young people of all ages, kindergarten through university, and it's now in 75 countries and growing. Its main message, every one of us makes an impact on the planet every single day, and we get to choose what sort of impact we make. Because of everything being interrelated, we decided at the first meeting, which was in Tanzania, we decided that each group would choose, you choose your project. One project to help people, one to help animals, one to help the environment. Not every member has to do everything, but they need to share what they do as a group. So, super successful program. And it's growing across the UK thanks to Jasmina and Rosemary. Great team. We have a great team. JGI has 25 chapters around the world, and everywhere there are great teams. So basically, the Roots and Shoots groups are choosing projects which are flexible depending on their age, their environment, their socioeconomic group, their culture, their religion. And one thing we love to do is to bring together young people from different spheres. And they seem to learn that much more important than the color of your skin, your culture, your language, your religion, is the fact we're all human. We all laugh. We all cry. we all can love. Roots and Shoots began in '91. Many adults out in the world today, some in decision-making positions, have been through the program. And we find that they retain Roots and Shoots' core values of concern, compassion, and respect. Respect for other humans, respect for animals, respect for the environment, and compassion to go with it. So at the end of every Roots and Shoots meeting, the young people stand together and say, together we can, together we will, together we must save the planet. So I wonder if you'd all like to join me, all of you at Earthfest, and we say together, 1, 2, 3, together we can. We have the tools. Start again, sorry, that was me. 1, 2, 3, together we can, together we will, together we must save the planet. Should we try once more? I want you really to mean it. 1, 2, 3, together we can, together we will, together we must save the planet. Thank you.